the very famous idea that we always find discussed concerning the idea of Elu Toldos Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham Toldos Yitzchak, even though he doesn't openly ask this question in this Maimer like in other Mamarim, but it's that famous concept about why the repetition. And he does ask the question here, but the idea that the repetition is explicitly about the spiritual hemshech and continuation and relationship between what Yitzchak represented and Avram represented. So let's begin inside. This is the offspring or the histories of Yitzchak, the son of Avram, and Avram, he gave birth to Yitzchak. It's another question concerning this. Since it already says Yitzchak, the son of Avram, why does the pasuk again repeat and say that Avram gave birth to Yitzchak? Also, we need to understand why is it mentioned in the pasuk Avram and Yitzchak twice? Essentially, this is the same question like before, but the emphasis is being that the names of Avram and the names of Yitzchak have over here the significance that they are being pointed out in a double way. Meaning that what Avram represents, as we're going to talk about, is Chesed, Yitzchak represents the idea of Gvura. Doubling their names is the point over here. In other words, it's not just a question about the general repetition. The Torah repeats itself. It's about the names that are doubled, because the doubling of the names have a double significance or two tiers, as we'll explain, of what Avram is about, and two tiers and two levels of what Yitzchak is about. Line 6. He explains concerning this in Torah and Torah's Chaim of the Mittler Rebbe, the Chassidish Seder, as the Rebbe always refers to, that we have to be Mavir the Chassidish Seder, just like we have to be Mavir the Seder of the week. We also have to be Mavir the Chassidish Seder in Torah Oyer and Kudet Torah. Avram is the masculine waters. Masculine waters means that the masculine, the mashpia, gives us, that's the idea of waters, it's a flow. It's coming from the mashpia to us, meaning that's an inspiration from above. It's being given to us. Yitzchak is the level of the feminine waters, the inspiration that comes from below, just like the feminine is the mekabel, so to Yitzchak is the mekabel's type of idea. And that relates to always about the idea of chesed versus gvura. Chesed is the level of likened to water. Water comes, Gvura is likened to fire. Fire is oilam al-maylamata, it rises from below to above. So that's the idea of Isrustul Eila, Isrustul Sata of Avram and Yitzchak. So now we can understand based on this, the Yitzchak and Avram repetition, and also even the Ben part. It's not just the doubling of their names, like we said in the second part of the question, but also the Ben, meaning that one is resulting in an outcome of the other, just like a son is an outcome and from the father. So he says in line 12, Zeu Yitzchak ben Avram, Shaisa Rusa Dolosata Yitzchak, he bechinas ben shenilkachas meisrus Elo da Avram. When it says these are the toldos of Yitzchak, the son of Avraham, it means to tell you, Isarusa dolasata. Yitzchak represents the inspiration from below. That is derived, that is ben Avraham. It comes from the Isarusa dola, from the level of Avraham. So what's the following part of the pasuk? Avram hoili das Yitzchak. So he says in line 15, V'inyan Ashenihu, not the identical thing. When we read the pasuk in the Pshutishal Mikra, it's identical and therefore repetitive. If Yitzchak is the son of Avram, so obviously Avram gave birth to Yitzchak. So we're not talking about the same thing when we're talking about Yisrus Dola Yisrus Sata. In the first phrase, we're talking about that this Yisrus Sata of Yitzchak is a result of Avraham, of this Yisrus. Then Avraham held this Yitzchak is talking about a different Yisrus. Not the Yisrus that precedes any Yisrus Sata, like the Rebbe often brings down, that before we can do anything, there has to be a Yisrus from Hashem. Just like in general, there couldn't have been any type of Yisrus Sata if Hashem wouldn't have created us. Every Yisrus Sata is based on that there was first an Yisrus Leila from Hashem. But then there's a second Yisrus Leila, a follow-up Yisrus Leila. So he says in line 15, V'inyan Asheni was Yisrus Leila sheba la'achrei Yisrus Sata. The second phrase of the pasuk, Avram heard this Yitzchak, is talking about the inspiration of above. And that's a following, that's the next inspiration that followed the first one of Yitzchak before, and it empowers the inspiration from below, that from this inspiration down here below should finally be able to be the idea of birth. That's what it means. Avram hoilid es Yitzchak. The Serusa de La'ela that follows this Rusa Sata, that empowers that now the Serusa de Sata can give birth. And the Rebbe brings in the footnote 4 that this is similar to the physical Mayim Duchrin and Mayim Nukvin, the physical thing that the father gives and the mother gives. That there's a certain type of triggering that Chassidus says of the inner workings and the birth of the woman through the hashpah of the husband. And also there's another thing called the birur tipas man, not just the triggering, but the refining and taking the good out from what's going to be born, and the rest should be becomes the birth sac and things that are set aside eventually. This all comes from the father's ashpah. So again, so there should be able to be a haylada, a birth from the Yisrusa Sata. There needs to be a Yisrusa Eila, and that's Avraham hoilid as Yitzchak. The Yisrusa Eila following the Yisrusa Sata causes and brings about that now this Yisrusa Sata that was there before should now give birth. That's one explanation of the double Lashon V'zeu Inyan Avram Hoildes Yitzchak. That's, now we're going to go on to different explanation. Line 19. Another explanation this is, Dini Avram, who b'chinas chesed, Avram is a level of chesed like we always bring down. And ba'avodas ha'adam, hu inyan ha'aven, the avoid of a person, what's the sphere of chesed associated with? That has to do with the idea of love of Hashem. Yitzchak b'chinas gevura, and Yitzchak is the level of gevura, the level of might and severity, b'avodas ha'adam, hu inyan ha'yira, in the service of a person to Hashem. That's the level of awe and fear of Hashem. That's why Avraham is called Avraham Oyhavi, and Yitzchak, we're known, Yaakov called him Pachad Yitzchak, the fear of Yitzchak. So once we know that Avraham and Yitzchak represents the avodah of Ava and Yira, we'll understand the double lashon, because again, we're talking about twice Avraham, 2 levels of Ava, and twice Yitzchak, 2 tiers of Yira. Top of page Vav. Since in general the Ava and Yira are divided into 2 levels. The truth is, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, there's multiple levels in Ava, multiple levels in Yira, but in general they're divided into 2 levels. Ava Zuta, there's the minor love, the Ava Rab, and there's the great love. And the same thing, there's Yira Zuta, the minor awe of Hashem, the Yira Ilah, and the higher love of Hashem, or sometimes referred to as Yira Tata, the Yira Ilah. That's why it says in the pasuk twice Avraham and twice Yitzchak. In the previous explanation, it's not so much emphasized the twice Yitzchak that much, because it's the Yitzchak is not necessarily, the second Yitzchak is not necessarily different than the first Yitzchak, because we'll have Avraham hoyle this Yitzchak. Avraham is the one that causes that Yitzchak, this Rus de Lasata that we spoke about before, should have Peiris. But in this case, it's specific, the Rebbe says, that Avraham and Yitzchak are twice Avraham, twice Yitzchak, 2 levels of Ava, 2 levels of Yira. Once we've established that Avraham and Yitzchak are 2 levels of Ava, 2 levels of Yira, so now we need to see the order of the things. That it begins with Yitzchak, and it concludes with Yitzchak, and Avraham is like in the middle. So he says in line 4, we say that Avodah, the order of the service of Hashem is Yira Tata. First part of Avodah is Yira Tata. We start off with Kabbalah's oil. We need to do what we're told. That's Yira Tata. We know that Hashem is king. We follow his rules. Reishis Avodah ve'ikra ve'sharsha perik me'malef. Hashem is the king. Yira Tata. Then there's Abazuta, there's the minor love, for example, like on Avim Soteres, for example, that he talks about in Perik Yitches and on in Tanya. And then Avarabba, there's a great love. Now, again, in Abazuta, Avarabba, there's different ways of either Avim Soteres and Ava that's built on intellect, or we could have the Ava that's Kirish Be'esh or Ava Tanugin. However, we divide the minor and the greater love. So he says further, then after Avarab, after the great love, after all of these levels, minor awe, minor love, great love, then V'yirei law, then you have the ultimate level of awe of Hashem. You have the complete bittul, what's called Yiras Haraimus, Yiras Boishes. You're embarrassed from Hashem. You have this complete bittul and feeling in awe of Hashem. And this corresponds, that's also the order of the 4 letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei, when you go from below to above. And the last Hey of Yud Kei Vav Kei is the level of Yirat Hatah, the lower level of awe. The second level is the Vav, the level of the Midas, the way Av is part of the Midas. The second Hey is the level of the Hizbonus, the level of Bina, which has to do with Ava. And then you have the Yud, is the bittul of the highest level of Yira. And similarly, the Rebbe is going to explain that in davening also we go through this ladder of these different levels as well. So he says, line 7, that concerning the order in davening. That the order in davening is likened to a ladder, and a ladder you're going from below to above. It's standing on the ground and its head, it reaches to the heavens. That indicates, you're going from below to above. First and foremost, we start off with the lower level of Yira in davening, or as a precursor, as a preface, as an introduction to davening. Has to be prior to davening. Why does it have to be prior to davening? Why isn't it incorporated in davening itself? As it's known, the novelty and uniqueness of the avoid of davening is the idea of love. As opposed to awe has to be throughout the entire day. Awe is an all-encompassing thing, especially Yirat Atah, Kabbalah soil. Baram tzarech liyis zikaron tamid. It has to be a constant thing on a person's mind that the Eibishter is the king, like we said, same Perek Mamalef and Tanya. Davening, on the other hand, that's the focus of love. We're not expected. Tzaddikim can feel love a whole day. We have the Yira all day, basic Yira, Yira Tatah, Kabbalah soil, and davening is the time of Ava. So therefore, the first step in the day is the level of Yira, precursor to davening, and then you have davening, you have the level of love. There's also, to a certain degree, also another thing that's similar to that. It's said that Chassidus always brings down what it says in the Gemara. A person does not stand to daven only out of sincerity and this also a level of yira and Kabbalah soil. But since the davening has to be done out of simcha, so we explained that the kovid rosh has to be done prior to davening. So again, we have this yira before the davening, which is ava. He says in line 13, v'acharka beisat tefillah, afterwards during davening, tzarich la'oder is ava. One needs to awaken within themselves the level of love. Tchila ava zuta v'acharka ava rabba. First, the minor love, and afterwards, we have to bring out the great love. And afterwards, in the davening of Shemoneh Esrei, we come to the higher level of awe of Hashem. Bittul v'metzias. So that is when a person is standing in front of the king, he's in complete awe. That's Shemoneh Esrei. You don't even move a muscle. You're in complete awe of Hashem, not just Kabbalah oil. You're accepting the commands of the king, which can be something from afar. But you're standing in the presence of the king. That's a Yiras HaRoimus. That's the higher level, the Yirei Ilah. Bittul v'metzias is totally nullified. Based on this, that the order in a person's avodah in general, and we can see it also reflected in davening. That first there's the minor yira, then there's the minor avodah, then there's the greater avodah, and then there's the greater yira. So that's the Vesel Seder HaKosov. He says in line 17, that's the order of the pasuk. Yitzchak ben Avram. Avram held as Yitzchak. Over here, in the earlier explanation, the ben was something that was emphasized, and the Hoylid as Yitzchak was emphasized. That Yitzchak, how did you have this Rushla Sata? Only because he was a son of, he was born from the Yisrus that preceded it. And Avraham has to give birth, that the Yisrus Sata of Yitzchak should be able to hear in this explanation, the whole Ben and Hoylid you got to take out. That's why it's parenthetical over here. It's just the order of the names. It's nothing about, and perhaps that's also why the Rebbe like divides the first question into two parts. That he says both, why does he repeat the information, and what's the repetition of the names? Because in this second explanation, it's only about the Yitzchak, Avraham, and Yitzchak. It has nothing to do with the Ben. It has nothing to do with Hoylid. It's only Yitzchak is the Yirat Atah. Next thing is Avram, the Ava Zuta. It's nothing about Ben. Yirat Atah is not a Ben to the Ava Zuta. And then there is the Ava Rabbe, second time Avram. And again, no Hoylid. The Hoylid doesn't have anything to do with this idea. The Ava Zuta is not, the Ava Rabbe is not something that gives birth to the Yirei Ilah necessarily. Just, again, it's only the names that matter over here. So that's why he puts it in parentheses. So he says at the end of line 18, the Hainu, Yirat Atah Ava Zut, the Ava Rabba Yirei Ilah. Again, because he's putting those in parentheses, because the main thing is Yira Yitzchak, Ava Avram. Ava, second time is Avram again, Yira again Yitzchak. But which? It's not repetitive, it's different levels, so that's why he explains the first time it says Yitzchak, it's the lower Yira. The second time it says Yitzchak, it's the higher Yira. First time it says Avram, it's a lower love. Second time it says Avraham, it's the higher love. Excuse me. Line 20. Either way, the Rebbe says, according to both of these explanations, it's explained the advantage of Yitzchak over Avraham. Whether we are talking about the Yitzchak is Yisrus Lasata, or we're talking about that Yitzchak is Yira, in both cases, whether Yisrus Lasata and the level of Yira have an advantage over Avraham, which is the level of Chesed, which is either Ave or Yisrus La'el. This Maila of Yitzchak over Avraham is reflected in something that's going to take place when Mashiach comes. He says in the parentheses, line 21, that's why when Mashiach comes, they will say, Li Yitzchak Dafke specifically, they will say to Yitzchak, Ki ata avinu. There's a Gemara that says that, it says in the Pasuk, Ki ata avinu, says, Ki Avram le Yadanav le Yisrael le Yakirenu, and that they won't, they didn't know Abraham, and Yisrael they didn't recognize. Yitzchak, they will say, you are our father. So there's an explanation, the Gemara, about that. But al Chassidus, it's because of the special quality of Yitzchak. Labir Arishan, according to the first explanation, what's the Maila of Yitzchak over Avraham, explaining that Yitzchak is Ristul Asatam, Kivin Shalah, how law the Gvuras Mumata Lamaila. He Laloyak Bola, since the elevation of the levels of severities, the Gvura from below to above is below without any boundaries. Masha'en Kinam Shachas Hakasod Maila Matam, he Bagbola, as opposed to what comes down from Chesed, from above to below, is in a way that's limited. So he says that the level of Yitzchak, it says it's when it talks about Vakol Yiremim Muchasela, when it comes to Roimimus, uplifting, going up, there's no ends how much you can go up. On the other hand, Alter Rebbe in Torah says that it says twice Avraham, because there's Avraham, the way he's in Atzilus, and there's the level of Avraham that there is the way it comes down to Bia, and that's it. That's as far as it goes down. So in general, the Amshacha that comes from above to below is in a limited sense. The Halah, Matala, it's unlimited. So therefore, that's in the first explanation of Yitzchak is Esrus Lasata. We understand how Yitzchak is greater than Avraham because the level of Bligvul. And Ulabir Rashayni, the Rebbe says on the top of page Zayin, according to the second explanation, that the level of Yitzchak is Yira, and the level of Avraham is Ava. So again, the Maila is Yitzchak over Avraham. Ki Yira, Hila Maila Ma'ava, because Yira, or is higher than love. And later on, the Maimon is going to talk about this, that the Yira is likened to gold, and love is likened to silver, and it's Kemailas Hazav ala Kesef, like the advantage and the quality of gold over silver.